Thanks for joining us today. I'm Joshua Manning, Executive Pastor at First Baptist Church, Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Joining me today is Wade Humphries, Lead Pastor, and we're going to be discussing a book called The Pilgrim's Progress. Now, it's been a while since we've had an episode of the Abide in Advance podcast, but what we're planning to do with this book is drop an episode about every week on a different chapter of the book, so you won't be waiting very long for content. Now, Pilgrim's Progress holds a really unique place in the history of Christian literature. And just to start off, we're going to talk about the author a little bit. So, Wade, who was John Bunyan?
John Bunyan was a fascinating figure. He was born in the early 1600s. He struggled with his beliefs and was converted kind of middle part of the 1600s, and he became a preacher. And about the time he began preaching, the monarchy was restored in England, and they made it illegal for churches and preachers to function outside of the Church of England. But he was a nonconformist, Puritan. He was a Baptist, and he felt the conviction that he was called to preach. And so he would hold services and preach outside of the boundaries of the Church of England. And because of that, he was thrown in jail. And he was in jail for, I think, about 12 years.
Right, the first time.
The first time. And during that time in jail, he wrote a couple of very key works. One about his own religious pilgrimage called Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners, and the other, Pilgrim's Progress. And this book has stood the test of time, maybe the most published English book other than the Bible.
Right. Well, why study The Pilgrim's Progress? So we know a little bit about the author, but what makes this book so special?
Well, Bunyan, again, wrote this while he was in jail, and he really wrote it in kind of a twofold manner. One, it was sort of autobiographical in terms of what had happened in his own life, but it was also a picture of what the Christian life entails, which is one of the reasons I wanted us to study this book together, because it's such a helpful picture of what it means to follow Jesus and to be on a pilgrimage from your conversion to heaven. And so it's a very simple book, but a book of great depth. And I think that's why I want us to read it as a church family.
Now, it's written in the form called an allegory, and can you kind of just help us understand what is an allegory? How is that different from a usual narrative story?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the story, he mentions, I had a dream. Yeah. And so the whole narrative is told in the form of a dream. And it's an allegory, which is a story that uses pictures or symbols to communicate truths. And so this allegorical narrative pictures a man named Christian who was converted. He lived in the city of destruction, converted, and begins his journey to heaven. And we see that journey is fraught with peril. There are enemies. There are pitfalls and troubles and trials and snares. But the pilgrim Christian keeps marching on towards heaven and learns some valuable spiritual lessons along the way. And so he uses these different parts of the journey to communicate spiritual truths about our journey.
Right.
That's why it's so helpful.
So the way that we're going to kind of tackle this book is each week we'll be going over like a chapter, and we'll talk about the allegorical symbols, and we'll explain them and kind of pull in some Bible teaching into that and how we can use that in our own Christian lives.
Yeah, so I've been wanting to have a pastor's book club, and because this book's been so invaluable in my own life, I wanted to share it with others. And a lot of people, they pick up Pilgrim's Progress, and the language is a little bit dated, and there are long sections of dialogue between two characters or three characters. and it's an allegory, so it's a different genre. And so a lot of people kind of pick it up and don't get very far into it. I want to help make the book more accessible and practical, and show how this book is filled with Bible, and how it can contribute to their walk with Jesus. In fact, when I read you a quick quote, this is from a version I just bought of Pilgrim's Progress, and there's a little intro section in the book, but the author here who wrote the introduction quotes Charles Spurgeon. And Spurgeon, one of my heroes, he was a pastor in the late 1800s in England. He read the Pilgrim's Progress every year. So that was his pattern. He loved the book. And he said that Bunyan studied the Bible till his whole being was saturated with Scripture. And his writings continually make us feel and say, why, this man is a living Bible. Prick him anywhere, his blood is bibline. The very essence of the Bible flows from him. He cannot speak without quoting a text.
A lot of very notable Christians throughout history have quoted Pilgrim's Progress or noted it as one of the most important books in their formation. And so we're hoping that as you go through the book, you'll be just deepened in your faith by it. You'll maybe see how the struggles of the enemy today mirror something from, way back in the 17th century.
He deals with topics like, depression, worldliness, fear, spiritual warfare. There's so many different topics that are just really relevant and practical, and I want people to make that connection with this book.
Right. Well, we'll put the podcast on our YouTube page, on our social media, and we'll link it into our podcast portal on the website. But where you can pick up a copy of the book, the exact version we'll be using, is if you go back to the Welcome Center behind the sanctuary, there's a bookshelf set up, and it has about 49 copies of this book that you can check out. Just make a note that you're checking it out and make sure you check it back in. I want to thank Lynn Lambert for setting that bookshelf up. She's doing that as part of the Media Center ministry here called the Athenaeum. And we're going to have stuff like this coming up about once a quarter. There's going to be a book or some type of focus. We're also working on a shelf of staff picks. So if you wonder what our staff likes to read, you wonder what Wade's reading right now, you can just keep an eye on that bookshelf, and we'll update that throughout the year. But if you would like a copy, either check Amazon or check the bookshelf back in the Welcome Center behind the sanctuary. Anything else we need to know before we get started?
No, I just hope you'll read it with us. It's a great book, very helpful, very encouraging, very challenging. I think it'll help you to ingest more Scripture, and it'll help you love Jesus more. I really do.
I like the way Bunyan talks too.
Yes, love that English.
Well, thank you for joining us. This is just a quick intro showing you what's coming with the Pilgrim's Progress. And each week also, if you have a question from either the previous week or about an upcoming chapter, email us. Email me at jmanning@fbcfwb.org, or send us a text, or just put something in one of the boxes in the sanctuary with a question on it, and we will anonymously read your questions as we go through this. So we want this to be a dialogue between us and you, and we hope this is spiritually edifying and beneficial for you. Thank you again for joining us. Have a good day.